A prince humiliated her in front of the entire academy, broke their engagement, and exiled her from the country. Everyone thought her life was over, but the girl they threw away was hiding memories from another world, and what waited for her on the other side of that exile was something nobody could have predicted. This is the story of a rejected villainess who lost everything and came back with more than anyone thought possible. So how did it all begin? The announcement came without warning. Prince Fritz declared that his engagement to Letitia was annulled, and in the same breath, she was drenched from being shoved into a fountain. She stood there, soaking wet, tears welling in her eyes as she tried to process what was happening. Behind Fritz, a girl cowered while he stood tall, full of self-righteous anger. Letitia could barely hold herself together, but she forced herself to remember who she was. Then the memories hit her. Not memories of this life, but of another one entirely. She remembered a quiet afternoon, walking her old dog Jiro, a Shiba Inu with white fur creeping across his face from age. She remembered planning to make strawberry ice cream when she got home, the bond she had with that dog, the simple happiness of that mundane life. It all came flooding back. And then she remembered how it ended. She had been crossing the street with Jiro when a truck came barreling through. She threw herself in front of her dog without thinking. The impact was the last thing she ever felt in that life. Back in the present, Letitia clenched her fists as water dripped from her hair. The tears on her face were not for herself or this humiliation. They were for Jiro. Fritz saw her crying and accused her of putting on a show for sympathy. That snapped something in her. She declared her identity as a duke's daughter with absolute firmness. Fire magic surged around her, and she used it to dry herself completely, the flames evaporating every drop of water from her clothes and hair. The bystanders watched in stunned silence. With her composure restored, Letitia walked straight up to Fritz and asked him directly whether he was truly serious about breaking their engagement. She challenged his accusations about her treatment of Smaya, pushing through the emotional storm inside her. Fritz's entire group stood together against her, unified in their hostility. Smia was introduced as a baron's daughter who supposedly lacked common sense because she had been raised among commoners. Fritz's allies rushed to her defense. Ilias, the prime minister's son, smugly pointed out that Smaya was one of the rare light magic users in the country, practically a saint, and implied that Letitia was simply jealous. Dustin, the knight commander's son, was even more aggressive. He accused Letitia of using her noble status to harass a weaker girl. Letitia stood her ground and demanded an apology from Dustin, but the confrontation only escalated. Fritz then accused Letitia of something deeper. He claimed she had never truly cared about him, that everything she had done was motivated by ambition, and that she had always been mocking him behind his back, his face twisted with resentment. Letitia refuted every word, insisting that her feelings and efforts over the years had been genuine. Smia clung to Fritz, showing open affection, while Fritz openly mocked Letitia for looking down on Smaya's common birth. Letitia felt like she had been cast as the villainess in some cliché story. Her past life memories made the pattern painfully obvious, but she refused to simply accept the role. She steadied herself and began thinking about how to navigate this. Then Fritz pointed at her and demanded she leave the country immediately. Exile. Letitia's mind raced through the political consequences. If her ducal house clashed with the royal family, it could tear the kingdom apart. She realized Ilias had likely orchestrated this whole situation to replace her with Smaya for political gain. But the exile had gone further than even he had planned. She could see Ilias looking flustered as things spiraled out of control. Through all of it, the betrayal, the false accusations, the public humiliation, Letitia drew on her past life experiences to keep herself steady. She was already thinking about what came next. Letitia quickly pieced together what had happened behind the scenes. Smia's family and Ilias's family had likely conspired to claim the queen's seat. The engagement government annulment had been their plan all along, but the exile was an unexpected escalation. Still, there was nothing she could do to reverse it now. She decided to frame her departure on her own terms, telling Fritz that she would leave because he clearly despised her, not because she accepted the accusations. She asked whether the king even knew about this decision and received no real answer. She sighed and accepted her fate. As she walked away, the nobles around her whispered that exile was as good as a death sentence. But Letitia found that her memories from her previous life dulled the sting. She had already died once. Starting over in a foreign land did not frighten her the way it would have frightened someone who had only known this world. She arrived back at the ducal residence, where her loyal servant Lucian was waiting by the carriage. He immediately noticed something was wrong and asked what had happened. Letitia explained everything. Once they were inside the carriage, Lucian's reaction was instant fury. He cursed Fritz as a fool who deserved death for humiliating his lady, and he swore he would follow Letitia to the ends of the earth. Letitia remembered how she had chosen Lucian from an orphanage 7 years ago when she was only 10. His loyalty had never wavered since. The two of them shared a moment of quiet reassurance, ready to face whatever came next together. Later that evening, Letitia dreaded having to tell her father about the annulment, but first came dinner. She sat before a lavish meal and could barely eat it. The food was smothered in heavy spices, a status symbol among nobles ever since exotic spices had been introduced from a southern continent about 40 years ago. Every noble household piled them on to show off their wealth, completely burying the flavor of perfectly good ingredients. Letitia, with her past life memories of simple, well-seasoned food, found it unbearable. She sipped her wine and quietly wished she could be exiled to the kingdom of Leorbelin, which was known for less spiced cuisine and had a competent new crown prince. A maid came and told Letitia that her father wanted to see her. She went to Duke Gildasha's office, bracing herself for the worst. Her father confronted her immediately, asking how she had managed to lose her fiancé to some self-proclaimed saint. Letitia apologized and explained everything that had happened. The Duke told her to stay in the mansion and behave herself while he arranged a destination for her exile. Then he asked if she had any wishes. Letitia hesitated, then asked for permission to use the kitchen. It was an unusual request for a noblewoman, but to her surprise, he granted it. She left his office feeling a small, unexpected spark of happiness. Letitia reflected on her father's stern demeanor as she walked back to her room with Lucian. She had not expected him to actually give her permission. He had even told her to be careful about injuries while she kept herself busy. She wondered if that was his way of showing concern, but there was really no way to know with a man like him. She decided not to overthink it and to just get some sleep. The next morning, Letitia headed straight for the kitchen, filled with excitement. She surveyed the ingredients available to her: eggs, cream, sugar, honey, and some scrap iron. She put on an apron and got to work. The iron scraps caught her attention first. She used a form of earth magic called refinement to shape and manipulate the metal. Pleased with how well her magical abilities responded, then it hit her. In her previous life, she'd been on her way to eat ice cream when she died. She had never gotten to taste it. Now, in this new life with magic at her disposal, she could make it herself. She decided right then and there that she was going to recreate ice cream. She started whisking egg whites with sugar, putting real effort into it. She added cream, mixed everything together, and poured the batter into trays. Then she used water magic to create ice, covering it with salt to lower the temperature. She recalled how it worked, like a science experiment from her old world, though she could not remember the exact ratios. She tried 2 different methods to see which would work better. Her magical reserves held up easily, and she marveled at how much power she had. Refining her abilities had clearly paid off. She even thought to herself that it was practically cheating at this point. After some time, the ice cream was complete. She felt genuinely proud of what she had made. The kitchen chef walked in and was surprised to find her there. Letitia offered to share the ice cream, and the chef eagerly accepted. When the kitchen staff tasted it, their eyes lit up. They could not stop praising how delicious it was. Letitia told them she had learned about it from books she studied during her princess consort training, she smiled to herself, knowing full well that she could never tell them the real source of her knowledge was memories from another world. One of the staff members asked about a dish, and Letitia happily agreed to discuss ways they could work with it. She was settling into the kitchen naturally, finding joy in something for the first time since the annulment. Several days passed. Then an attendant arrived with a letter from Fritz. Letitia stared at it, caught between curiosity and apprehension. She had no idea what the prince who had just exiled her could possibly want to say. Letitia opened the letter. It was supposedly from Prince Fritz, requesting that she meet him at a specific location. She and Lucian made their way to the designated spot, a cluster of old ruins in the west district of the royal capital. Letitia studied the surroundings with a thoughtful expression, taking in the ancient stonework, but instead of Fritz, it was Smaya who appeared, glaring at her with open contempt. Smaya mocked her, questioning what Letitia could possibly know. Letitia was not surprised. She had already suspected the letter was not from Fritz, based on its contents. The confrontation escalated quickly. Smaya declared that she could easily become a noblewoman with the prince's favor and demanded that Letitia give up her noble status and become a commoner. Letitia kept her composure and asked whether Smaya had considered what kind of damage that sort of demand would do to the country. Smaya brushed off the concern, confident that Fritz would do whatever she asked. Letitia then struck at the heart of the matter. She questioned whether Smia's story about being a baron's illegitimate daughter was even real. Smia's expression changed instantly, but she tried to deny it. Letitia did not back down. She presented evidence that her attendants had gathered, revealing Smia's true identity. Her real name was Mello, and she had been born in Nilit's village to commoner parents. She was not a baron's daughter at all. The whole thing was a fraud. Smia stared in shock as Letitia laid out the facts with a confident smirk. Lucian stood nearby, clearly pleased with how things were unfolding. Smia tried to fight back, but Letitia made it clear she no longer cared about the engagement. It meant nothing to her now. Letitia turned to leave, announcing that she intended to report everything to the Ilias family at the Irigar dukedom. That was when Smaya panicked. A burst of light erupted around them as Smaya activated her magic, trapping Letitia inside a light barrier. Smaya screamed that her magic was superior, that Letitia couldn't escape. Letitia stayed calm. She gathered her water magic, compressed it into a razor-sharp water cutter, and sliced clean through the barrier. The light shattered around her. Smia could not believe what she was seeing. She stammered, asking how Letitia could still hold her head so high after everything that had happened. Letitia's own surprise at the strength of her magic was internal. She had grown more than she realized, but outwardly she remained composed. She told Smia something unexpected. She actually thanked her. By stealing Fritz, Smia had freed Letitia from a loveless engagement. She had no intention of forgiving Smia for the lies and the manipulation, but she could at least acknowledge the unintended favor. Smia stood there, tearful and bewildered, unable to process what she had just heard. Letitia walked away from the confrontation, but her expression was serious. She told Smia that things were only going to get harder for her from here on out, given the restrictions she now faced. As they moved through the ruins, Lucian noticed someone nearby and quietly alerted Letitia. A figure stepped forward, explaining that they had come to retrieve Smaya. Letitia eyed them with a knowing expression and asked what they were doing at a place like this so late at night. The exchange had a clear undercurrent of power and familiarity. Letitia suggested that stricter monitoring of Smaya would be necessary and handed over the documents her attendants had compiled. The goal was clear: prevent any further disturbances for the Gramwell house. The person receiving the documents was cautious, saying they would pass the information along but could not make any promises. There was a bureaucratic tension between them, neither side fully trusting the other. The conversation shifted to the annulment itself. Letitia brought up how simple it had been to pull off, given how easily Fritz was manipulated. She then asked a question that had been nagging at her about why this person had even joined the annulment plan in the first place. The answer was blunt. They had simply had no reason to refuse. They turned away as they said it, clearly not proud of the admission. Letitia pressed for more of an explanation, but the person's real thoughts were strategic. strategic. They were thinking about personal gain, about positioning themselves for advantage. There was a clear gap between what they said and what they actually wanted, though they could not bring themselves to admit their ambitions out loud. The scene shifted to Letitia returning home. As she slipped back inside late at night, her father caught her. Duke Gildacia was furious, demanding to know what she was doing out at such an hour. Letitia, startled by the intensity of his anger, immediately apologized, but then, unexpectedly, he pulled her into an embrace. His voice cracked as he told her he would not be able to bear it if something happened to her. Letitia's eyes filled with tears. She apologized again, this time for making him worry. Her father pulled back and reassured her that what had happened was not her fault, that the past incidents were behind them now. Then his tone shifted. He told her there was something they needed to discuss and invited her inside. He revealed that a proposal had come in. Not just any proposal, she had been offered the chance to become the queen of a foreign kingdom. Letitia could barely process it. Just days ago, she had been publicly cast aside by a prince. Now she was being considered for a queen's throne in another country. The proposal was clearly political, and her father laid out the details. The king in question was known as the Silver Wolf King, a ruler with an impressive reputation, but also surrounded by rumors that he disliked women. His interest in Letitia was likely not personal, but strategic. Choosing a bride from another country meant avoiding entanglement with local noble factions, and Letitia's unfamiliarity with his kingdom's politics made her a convenient choice. Her father explained that the king faced pressure to marry, and his well-known disinterest in women limited his options domestically. The discussion continued. Letitia learned that deeply rooted prejudices in the Wolfwald kingdom made finding queen candidates extremely difficult. But one detail caught her attention. There was a law called the White Wedding, which stated that if a marriage went without consummation for 2 years, it could be dissolved. That changed everything for her. She realized she could use her crown princess education to serve as queen for 2 years, fulfill the political arrangement, and then return home if things did not work out. It was essentially a trial period with an exit. She weighed the conditions and found them favorable. It gave her an advantage and freedom she had not expected. Finding a suitable fiancé after the public annulment would have been nearly impossible anyway, and this arrangement gave her a clear path forward. She could even see it as doing a favor for King Glenreed while securing her own future. In the days that followed, Letitia threw herself into cooking with renewed energy. She spent her time in the kitchen, experimenting and creating. Someone on the staff remarked that she was at her liveliest when she was cooking, and Letitia could not deny it. She admitted openly that she loved it, even though it was unusual for a noblewoman. Her father, who had seemed concerned at first, ultimately expressed his support for her unconventional interest. He gripped her hand as a show of encouragement for the proposal and her decision to go. A few days later, the time came to depart. Duke Gildacia was visibly anxious, asking if she was truly ready. Letitia smiled and reassured him with quiet confidence. Lucian was by her side, ready as always. Before she left, she handed her father something. It was a recipe book she had compiled herself, filled with dishes she wanted him to try. It was her way of leaving a piece of herself behind, and perhaps a way to quietly improve the food culture she had always found so unbearable. As the carriage pulled away, Letitia looked forward with a calm sense of hope. She did not know what awaited her in the Wolfwald kingdom, but she was no longer the humiliated girl standing in a fountain. She had a plan, a purpose, and the freedom to start over. Over a month had passed since Letitia left home. The carriage rolled steadily forward, flanked by mounted guards and attendants. The journey had been long, but they were getting close. Then word came of a monster outbreak ahead. One of the attendants suggested taking a detour for safety, but the lodging along the alternate route was already full. Rather than push through a monster territory or risk the detour, the group decided to make camp for the night. Letitia smiled and took the decision in stride. She offered to help with the preparations, which caught her attendants off guard. They had not expected a noblewoman to volunteer for camp work. As the group set up, Letitia headed straight for the cooking area. The soldiers handling the kitchen duties were clearly out of their element, nervous just holding their knives. Letitia stepped in, took a knife, and began peeling vegetables with smooth, practiced skill. The guards watched in disbelief. Lucien worked alongside her, chopping ingredients with an ease that came from years at her side. He had picked up kitchen skills back during his time in the orphanage, and the two of them fell into a natural rhythm. Together, they prepared pot au feu, a simple stew that did not need complicated seasoning. The group watched every step with wide eyes, amazed at how effortlessly she worked. As the meal came together, Letitia added dried meat and commented on how the flavor was coming along nicely. She invited everyone to share the food. The camp was filled with the rich aroma of the stew, and the group could barely contain their hunger. When they finally ate, the reactions were unanimous. It was delicious. Letitia was quietly pleased by the praise, though she tried not to show it too much. One of the group jokingly pointed out the proper order for serving, lightening the mood even further. The next morning, the carriage resumed its journey and soon arrived at the royal capital of Wolfwald. Wooden bowls clattered on the carriage floor as they rolled through the gates. Letitia stared out at the cityscape, a cheering crowd lining the streets to welcome her. She gazed up at the castle in the distance and could not help but whisper in awe at the sight. Letitia's eyes were wide as she took in the kingdom of Wolfwald for the first time. The streets were bustling with people, and the energy of the city was infectious. Then she spotted them. Dogs. Fluffy, adorable dogs walking alongside their owners. Her heart nearly burst. She had specifically requested an open carriage so she could see everything, and now she was grateful for it. One of the dogs bounded over and licked a girl's face, and Letitia could barely contain herself. The sight was almost too much for someone who had lost her beloved Jiro in another life, but her excitement gave way to deeper thoughts as the carriage moved on. She noticed the crowd more carefully. Less than half of the people lining the streets appeared to be beastkin, people with animal ears and tails. She remembered what she'd been told about Wolfwald's population being roughly half beastmen. Their lower turnout for her arrival made her think. From the beastkin's perspective, a human queen from a foreign land might not be welcome. She sat quietly, processing the political reality of her new position. Before she knew it, she had been whisked away and dressed up in grand attire. She sat solemnly, reflecting on how quickly everything was moving. She was about to meet King Glenreed, the man she was supposed to marry. He was 6 years older than her. She hoped she could at least build a decent working relationship with him, even if her role as queen was more ornamental than anything else. Then she saw him. Silver hair, blue eyes that reminded her of a lake in winter. His presence was commanding, and Letitia found herself momentarily struck by how regal he looked. Glenreed studied her in return and commented that her appearance was striking and unforgettable, correctly guessing that she was Letitia Gramwell. She was thrown off by his words, wondering internally how he had read her so easily, despite the effort she had put into looking presentable. He offered her a royal villa to rest in, acknowledging that she must be exhausted from the long journey. Letitia thanked him gracefully and bowed. He made it clear that he would grant her wishes within reason, but the boundaries of her position were firmly set. She understood the message. She was expected to maintain a low profile. A smile crossed her face as she processed what that meant for her. As she turned to leave, something caught her attention. There was something peculiar about his scent, something she could not quite place, but she decided it was not the time to pry. The carriage wheels clattered as she was taken through a wooded path toward her new home, the trees and bird song creating a calm backdrop for this new chapter of her life. The royal villa came into view, and it was far more than Letitia had expected. It was a large, beautiful estate surrounded by greenery. She stood in front of it with Lucien and remarked that it felt more like a mansion than a simple villa. It had a slightly worn look to it, but that only made her like it more. It felt real, lived in, and perfectly suited to her taste. Inside, she was greeted by the butler, a middle-aged man named Vogan who had dog ears, and a cat-eared maid named Krona. Crona. Letitia's eyes went wide at the sight of them. Beastmen right here as her personal staff. Vogan introduced himself and Crona, then offered to show her around. His explanations were straightforward and easy to follow, which Letitia appreciated. By the time the tour was done, exhaustion hit her all at once. She collapsed onto the plush bed and let out a sigh of relief. She quietly appreciated that Glenn Reed had taken the care to prepare her personal effects in advance. As she lay there, her thoughts drifted to the king's distant demeanor. She wondered if keeping her at this villa, away from the main palace, was his way of keeping distance, because he could not fully accept her. It stung a little, but she refused to dwell on it. She stood up with fresh determination and told herself she would use this free time to come up with all sorts of plans. She stepped outside to enjoy the villa's garden, and the tranquility was exactly what she needed. Then she froze. A pair of wolves were staring at her from the foliage. Lucian immediately stepped in front of her, telling her to stay behind him. But before anything could happen, the wolves scurried away. A moment later, a boy came sprinting out of the trees after them, breathless and apologetic. He had wolf-like features and introduced himself as Edgar, explaining that he was the Wolf Watch, responsible for looking after the wolves that roam the grounds. Letitia's tension melted instantly. She offered Edgar a warm smile and introduced herself. The boy was flustered by her kindness, clearly expecting anger rather than friendliness. As they talked, Letitia felt a familiar warmth. Edgar's affection for the wolves reminded her of the bond she had shared with Jiro in her past life. She understood that love for animals completely. Edgar was visibly relieved that she was not upset, and he spoke about the wolves with the kind of enthusiasm that only someone who truly cared could have. Letitia told Edgar that he was welcome to keep using the path through the garden. She had no intention of avoiding the wolves or making his job harder. Her smile broadened as she looked around at the estate, the garden, the wolves, and this earnest boy who loved them. This was the land of fluffy creatures she had secretly hoped for, and she was going to embrace every bit of it. It did not take long for Letitia to settle into her new routine with the wolves. She sat in the garden, gently brushing one of the large wolves with a grooming brush she had created, using her refinement magic. She stroked its fur and murmured praise as the wolf leaned into her touch, clearly enjoying every second. Memories of brushing Jiro in her past life floated through her mind. The feeling was the same, that simple, warm connection with an animal that made everything else fade away. She asked Edgar if he wanted to try. The boy hesitated, nervous about whether it was appropriate for him, but his excitement won out. He took the brush and began working through the wolf's coat. Letitia watched and told him how happy the wolf looked. Edgar laughed, genuinely pleased. It was shedding season, and before long, they were surrounded by wolves, eager for their turn, tails wagging and fur floating everywhere. Then something caught Letitia's eye. A wolf, unlike the others, appeared at the edge of the garden. Its coat was a lustrous silver, and its eyes were a vivid, piercing blue. It was striking. Two of the smaller wolves nearby seemed uneasy, sniffing the air as if confused by an unfamiliar scent. Letitia noticed the reaction and thought back to when King Glenreed had commented on her scent during their first meeting. The wolves were picking up on the same thing. Lucian stepped forward immediately, telling Letitia to get behind him, but before the tension could escalate, a man appeared with a calm smile, assuring them there was nothing to worry about. He introduced himself as Melvin, King Glenreed's aide. The group relaxed. Edgar recognized the silver wolf's significance. Its blue eyes were rare among wolves, but a known trait of the Glenreed royal family. The realization hit him hard, and he stared in disbelief. Letitia looked at the silver wolf with quiet sympathy, understanding that this creature carried more weight than its appearance suggested. The silver wolf stared back at Letitia. Melvin mentioned that the wolf was accustomed to grooming but did not like being touched or caressed. Letitia held the brush and considered the situation carefully. She respected the boundary. The mood shifted as Letitia headed inside with a new plan. She asked about the kitchen and learned it was available until dinner. She announced she was going to make sweets and invited the others to taste them later. Krona, the cat-eared maid, lit up at the idea and eagerly volunteered to help. Letitia got to work in the kitchen, directing Krona through the preparations. Krona was briefly pulled away by someone, but Letitia pressed on alone, confident in Krona's competence for later tasks. She had decided to make a chiffon cake. She separated egg yolks from whites, set the whites aside to chill, and began mixing sugar into the yolks with focused precision. The cake-making process demanded Letitia's full concentration. She sifted flour into the bowl carefully, then poured in vegetable oil and water, mixing everything together with steady hands. Next came the meringue. She added sugar to the cold egg whites and began whisking. The effort was intense. She pushed herself harder, whipping the egg whites until they formed stiff, glossy peaks. Her arms burned, but the meringue was perfect. She folded the meringue into the prepared batter, blending it thoroughly until the texture was even. She muttered encouragement to her own aching arms as she worked. Once combined, she poured the mixture into a handmade mold and slid it into the preheated oven. Then came the hardest part, waiting. She sat with Krona watching the clock, barely able to contain her anticipation. When the timer was up, Letitia pulled the cake from the oven and hung the mold upside down to cool. It looked a bit strange hanging there, but she knew the technique was necessary. Once it had cooled completely, she carefully removed the cake from the mold. The result was impressive. The texture was incredibly light and airy. Letitia stared at it and could not help but marvel at how fluffy it was. She felt accomplished. Even though her muscles were screaming at her, she had barely finished plating it when Krona dashed back in, asking if there were sweets ready. Letitia smiled and told her she was just in time. Krona took a bite and froze. Her eyes went wide. She could not believe the texture, how it practically melted in her mouth. Letitia beamed at the reaction. That was exactly what she had been hoping for. Word spread quickly. The head chef, a man named Gilbert, heard that Letitia had baked something and came to see for himself. Letitia offered him a slice and asked for his honest opinion. Gilbert tasted it and was visibly shaken, not because it was bad, but because it was extraordinary. He felt so outclassed by Letitia's skill that he awkwardly suggested he should resign, believing his own abilities could not compare. Letitia immediately shut that down. She told him sincerely that she was grateful for him and his work. She meant it. Gilbert had apparently been dismissed from a previous position due to conflicts, and his confidence had taken a real hit, but Letitia recognized his talent and made sure he knew she valued him as a gifted chef with great skill. Her words slowly eased the doubt on his face. Letitia went a step further. She asked Gilbert if he would like to cook alongside her whenever she was in the kitchen. His eyes widened at the offer. He had not expected to be invited in as a partner rather than replaced. He accepted, looking genuinely hopeful for the first time. With that settled, Letitia returned to the garden and found herself face to face with the silver wolf again. She could not resist. The wolf's fur was magnificent, and she reached out, overcome by the urge to touch it, but the wolf growled low and clear. She pulled back immediately, apologizing. The wolf's response was firm but not aggressive, and Letitia found the whole interaction endearing despite the rejection. She crouched down and studied the wolf more closely. She noticed its paw pads were black and found them utterly charming. She examined them with the kind of fascination only a true animal lover could have. Then something else caught her attention. Despite it being shedding season, this wolf had barely lost any fur. She pointed it out, half teasing, warning the wolf that keeping its winter coat too long would lead to uneven shedding later. The wolf seemed to accept the observation with quiet indifference. A maid hurried over with a letter for Letitia. She was surprised. The letter was an invitation from someone named Natalie, requesting Letitia's company for lunch at her villa the day after tomorrow. Letitia recognized the name. The kingdom of Wolfwald had been formed by the union of 5 islands, with the Glenreed unified family ruling from the central island. Each of the 4 surrounding islands maintained its own influential family. Natalie was a descendant of the Western Islands royal family and one of the queen candidates who had been in consideration before Letitia arrived. This was not a casual invitation. Letitia understood that meeting Natalie carried political weight. As a queen candidate herself, Natalie likely had her own reasons for reaching out. Letitia prepared herself carefully for the visit. When she arrived at the Western Royal Villa, the mansion was lavishly decorated. Letitia took it all in, aware that every detail of this meeting would matter. She was led inside, where Natalie was waiting at a dining table, poised and welcoming. The 2 women exchanged polite smiles. Letitia thanked Natalie warmly for the invitation, and Natalie welcomed her in return. The atmosphere was gracious on the surface, but there was an unmistakable undercurrent of strategy beneath the pleasantries. This was the beginning of something important. The lunch at Natalie's villa was a trial in itself. Letitia sat at the beautifully set table, glancing at her food and trying to keep a neutral expression. The cooking was unbearably salty, spicy, and greasy. Every bite was a struggle. She wanted to leave, but forced herself to keep eating. Across the table, Natalie sat with a calm, unreadable expression. Letitia studied her closely. She noticed that Natalie kept reaching for her water glass, taking long gulps between bites. That small detail told Letitia everything. Natalie did not like the heavily spiced food either. When Natalie asked if Letitia had found the meal satisfactory, Letitia smiled politely and said it was a fine meal. She kept her true feelings to herself. The pleasantries continued until an elegant woman stepped forward and introduced herself as Diaz de Gris, Natalie's aunt on her father's side. Diaz requested permission to speak on Natalie's behalf, and Letitia allowed it. Diaz got to the point. She suggested that Letitia consider joining their political faction, mentioning previous alliances involving the queen candidates. Letitia declined without hesitation. She told them plainly that she wanted to stay out of politics and spend her time at the royal villa in peace. Her mind was made up. She would not be endorsing anyone. She added something sharper. Half the population of Wolfwald was beastkin, and she as queen would never support any faction that dismissed half of the country's citizens. Her expression was firm and unyielding. The tension carried into the kitchen, where the head chef defended his heavily spiced cooking with pride, insisting it was refined cuisine. Letitia pushed back. She questioned whether the excessively spiced food was a form of harassment toward beastkin, whose keen sense of smell made such dishes overwhelming. A map of the kingdom's regions and their demographics crossed her mind, reinforcing the cultural divide between the human majority Western regions and the beastkin populations elsewhere. Letitia made it clear that she would not overlook the Western approach to cuisine, but she insisted on more considerate cooking going forward. She turned to Natalie directly and questioned the quality of the meal. Natalie's composure cracked slightly under the pressure from both Letitia and Diaz. As Letitia prepared to leave, Diaz warned her that she would regret turning down their offer. Letitia did not flinch. She replied courteously but firmly and wished them a good day. Behind the scenes, whispers circulated among the kitchen staff about a chef named Gilbert who had historical ties to this very villa. One of the cooks, looking uneasy, remarked that the heavily seasoned dishes needed to be adjusted, concerned about the impact on Natalie. The picture became clearer. A staff member explained that Gilbert had been dismissed from Natalie's kitchen because he had taken pity on Natalie and tried to moderate the spices. That act of kindness cost him his position. He was discharged immediately when it was reported. Letitia listened and took it in quietly. She told the person that she appreciated them sharing the information and that she held Gilbert in high regard as a skilled chef. She smiled confidently, making it clear that she valued talent over politics. Letitia turned to Natalie and asked directly whether she alone had made the decision to dismiss Gilbert. Natalie confirmed it in a whisper, her expression subdued. There was regret there, even if she would not say it outright. The scene shifted as Letitia returned to the villa. A message arrived from King Glenreed. Summoning her to court, she acknowledged it with gratitude and went to meet him. The king asked how she was finding her accommodations. Letitia responded positively, thanking him for the villa and assuring him she had no complaints. Her tone was sincere and measured. Glenreid seemed surprised. He had expected dissatisfaction, perhaps even demands. He questioned her contentment with living in the detached villa, clearly testing whether she would push for more. Letitia maintained her poise. She explained that her current arrangement prevented needless conflict and that she understood the court politics at play. The isolated villa was not a punishment in her eyes. It was protection, a strategic buffer between her and the palace intrigue that could easily consume her. She told him she was satisfied with her life and wished for nothing more than a healthy, undisturbed existence. Glenreid was left thinking after she departed. He had originally planned to keep Letitia occupied and out of the way for 2 years until the white marriage could be dissolved, but her astuteness caught him off guard. She was not the naive, decorative queen he had expected. She understood the political landscape, accepted her position without resentment, and had adapted to her environment with a competence he had not anticipated. He sighed, realizing there was more to Letitia Gramwell than he had given her credit for. Glenreid found himself reflecting on something else entirely. He had observed Letitia from a distance, watching her play with the wolves in the garden, brushing their fur and fussing over them with unguarded joy. It was a side of her she kept hidden from others, and he found himself thinking that he did not mind it at all. The thought crossed his mind to transform into a wolf so he could observe her more closely. He had noticed how effective her brush was, and his curiosity was growing. Meanwhile, Letitia was in her element, cuddling one of the fluffy wolves and marveling at its softness. She brushed its coat with sparkling eyes, completely lost in the moment. Nearby, Edgar watched the scene and muttered something about wishing he could become a wolf. When Letitia asked if he had said something, he quickly brushed it off. She chatted with Edgar in good spirits and mentioned that she had proposed 2 changes to Gilbert in the kitchen. The first was improving the chiffon cake recipe, and the second was moderating the use of spices in the daily cooking. Gilbert had been receptive, nodding along as she explained her ideas. Letitia appreciated his willingness to collaborate. Despite his social difficulties, his craftsmanship commanded respect from the kitchen staff, and they supported the proposed changes. Letitia returned to the wolves, delighting in their fluffy texture as 2 of them stared at her with curious eyes. Even when one of the wolves seemed unimpressed by her enthusiasm, she remained cheerfully unbothered. Then Melvin arrived, greeting Letitia with his usual calm smile. He observed how the wolves surrounded her with affection and mentioned that one of them still had no name. He offered Letitia the chance to name it. Her eyes lit up. She suggested the name Goo, but the wolf immediately rejected it with a sharp bark. She tried again, adjusting her approach, and eventually settled on calling it Mr. Goo. The wolf considered it for a moment, then gave a small nod of acceptance. Letitia laughed at the whole exchange, finding the wolf's opinionated personality endearing. She brushed its coat as it grunted in approval, and she decided it was simply a weird but wonderful wolf. As the afternoon wound down, the wolves and Edgar prepared to leave. Letitia watched them go with a twinge of disappointment. Then something caught her eye. A cat leapt into view, landing nearby with effortless grace. Letitia and Lucian both froze, staring. Her face broke into excitement as she identified it immediately. This land of fluffy creatures had just revealed another surprise. The tabby cat did not wait around. It had light green eyes and gray striped fur, and it moved like it wanted Letitia to follow. She took off after it, Lucian right beside her, holding her hand to keep her steady. The cat glanced back at them as if leading them somewhere on purpose. As they followed, a bittersweet scent drifted through the air. Letitia's nose picked it up immediately, and her curiosity sharpened. Then she saw them, strawberries, right there on the ground. She could barely believe it. The fruit looked and smelled almost identical to the strawberries she remembered from Earth. Memories of her past life came flooding in. Her love for strawberries, the taste she had never gotten to enjoy one last time before she died. She watched the cat sniff one, lick it, and then bite into it without hesitation. If the cat could eat it, she reasoned, it was probably safe for humans too. Still, she used a quick purification spell just to be safe, and then she took a bite. It was delicious. The bittersweet flavor filled her mouth, and a wave of nostalgia washed over her. She quietly thanked the cat for leading her here. The cat continued eating happily alongside her. Lucian knelt beside Letitia and commented on how strange the cat's behavior was, leading them to fruit like this. Letitia suddenly realized something important. Strawberries might not exist as a known food in this world. That would explain why Lucian had no idea what they were. She expressed her surprise at how rare these fruits might be. Lucian raised a concern. He pointed out that eating unfamiliar wild fruit was reckless. It could have been poisonous. Letitia acknowledged the risk and promised to be more careful in the future. She decided to consult with the kitchen experts about the fruit's safety. They walked back to the villa with the cat trailing behind them. Letitia wondered if the cat wanted to be taken in, though it still bolted whenever she tried to touch it. Back in the kitchen, Letitia showed the strawberries to Gilbert. His reaction was not what she expected. He identified the fruit as something called the monster gem, a poisonous fruit despite its beautiful appearance. Letitia was shocked, but she quickly pointed out that the fruit she had was red, not violet like the poisonous variety. The distinction left everyone staring, uncertain about what they were actually dealing with. Gilbert's expression shifted from concern to recognition. He smiled and explained that what Letitia had found was actually called the poor man's gem, a rare but edible fruit that closely resembled the poisonous monster gem. The shape was eerily similar, which explained the initial alarm. Gilbert admitted he had tasted it a few times before and found it exceptional. He compared the situation to how tomatoes and belladonna looked similar on Earth, a parallel that clicked immediately in Letitia's mind. The poor man's gem had a long history of being rejected simply because people associated it with its toxic look-alike. During times of extreme poverty, though, it had saved people from starvation. The conversation turned to the fruit's official name. Gilbert rattled it off. Jilbilyugi Mabianagaboon. Letitia stared at him. The name sounded like a curse. She immediately suggested calling it strawberry instead, since that was what it looked and tasted like to her. Everyone agreed it was a far better name. From that point on, strawberry it was. The tabby cat reappeared, peeking in through a window and drawing everyone's attention. It led Letitia and the others on a brief chase before Gilbert managed to lure it back with a strawberry. The cat took the bait, but then something unexpected happened. It stood upright on its hind legs. Everyone froze. This was not a normal cat. Gilbert recognized it. The creature was a gardener cat, a mythological beast in the same class as dragons and griffins, legendary for its ability to aid plant growth. They were incredibly rare, nearly hunted to extinction, and seeing one was practically unheard of. Letitia was stunned. The pieces fell into place. The gardener cat had likely led her to the strawberries because it wanted them cultivated. It was not just a stray cat with good instincts. It was a gourmet creature that knew exactly what it wanted, and what it wanted was strawberry dishes. Letitia wasted no time testing the gardener cat's abilities. She brought it outside to where a monster gem tree grew nearby. She explained the difference in how strawberries and monster gems ripened, noting that the gems grew on small trees while the strawberries grew differently. She pulled out a container of seeds from the strawberries she had collected and planted them in the soil. The gardener cat raised its paw and the seeds sprouted instantly, growing into strawberry plants right before their eyes. Letitia and the others watched in amazement. The cat yawned and flopped down immediately after, exhausted from the magic. True to its nature, it wanted food and sleep in equal measure. Letitia watched it doze off and smiled. Back inside, she had a different challenge. The kitchen staff were still skeptical about the strawberries. They whispered among themselves about whether the fruit was truly safe to eat. Letitia decided the best way to convince them was to cook something. She chose a dish that would change the fruit's form entirely, so its appearance would not trigger their fear of the monster gem. If they tasted it without seeing the raw fruit, their hesitation would disappear. She put on a bonnet, grabbed a copper pot, and got to work making strawberry jam. She explained that copper was ideal for jam making because of its heat conductivity, which helped achieve the right consistency quickly. She prepared the strawberries, added them to the pot with lemon juice, and stirred over high heat. carefully skimming the scum as it formed. When the jam reached the right consistency, she tested it by dropping a bit into a glass of water. It held its shape perfectly. The cat stirred at the scent of strawberries filling the kitchen, patting over with obvious interest. Letitia sampled the jam herself and was pleased. Without sugar, the sweetness was subtle, but it worked beautifully as a standalone treat. She offered some to the cat, which seemed to want its own spoon. She handed one over after a moment of deliberation. The cat's satisfied expression said everything. Letitia smiled, wondering if this might finally be the moment the cat would let her pet it. It was not. The cat finished eating and promptly fell asleep, following its desires as always. Letitia watched it snooze with a soft sigh. Some things could not be rushed. She turned her attention to the kitchen staff. The cooks had gathered around and were finally trying the strawberry jam. Their reactions were immediate and enthusiastic. The bittersweet flavor was delicious, and all skepticism vanished. They cheered, declaring that delicious food was its own justification. The excitement built as they discussed what other strawberry dishes could be made. Letitia felt a real sense of accomplishment. The strawberries had been accepted. She glanced at the sleeping cat and decided to let it rest. She shifted her focus back to improving the chiffon cake, determined to keep refining her recipes. But the peaceful mood did not last. Someone called for Letitia urgently. There was trouble. A subordinate of Natalie's had arrived, and the news was not good. The atmosphere shifted instantly. A woman appeared and commented critically on Letitia's attire, pointing out that it was not fitting for a queen consort. Her tone was openly mocking. Then came the real accusation. Someone was claiming that Letitia's chiffon cake, the recipe she had developed and shared at a tea party, had been plagiarized. The woman accused Letitia of stealing the recipe, not the other way around. Letitia was stunned. The accusation was absurd. She had created the chiffon cake herself from her own past life knowledge. But the claim was being made publicly, and it was clearly aimed at undermining both her and Gilbert. The conversation grew tense as the woman pressed the point, insisting the recipe was not original and questioning Gilbert's involvement. Letitia's shock gave way to resolve. There was a birthday party in 5 days, and she realized this accusation was time to damage her reputation before that event. She could not let it stand. Gilbert's honor and her own credibility were on the line. She made up her mind. She would confront this head on and prove that her work was her own before the party arrived. Letitia gathered her staff and discussed the situation. Someone had leaked information about the chiffon cake, and that meant there might be a spy among them. The details of her recipe had reached the wrong hands, putting both her honor and Gilbert's reputation at risk. They decided to ask the Wolfwatch for any reports of suspicious activity around the villa, while everyone else was told to act normally and not raise any alarms. Letitia stepped outside and sat down heavily, clenching her fists. She sighed and berated herself for being careless. She should have taken precautions against plagiarism from the beginning. She had known how common it was in noble society, yet she had let her guard down completely. Then a low growl broke through her thoughts. She looked up and found Mr. Goo standing right in front of her. The silver wolf had come to visit on its own, which almost never happened. Letitia was surprised but quietly moved. She sat with the wolf, wondering if it had somehow sensed she was feeling down. She had let herself become too comfortable, too relaxed. Even as queen, the wolf settled beside her and simply stayed, offering its silent presence. Letitia reached out and touched its fur. It was impossibly soft. She asked if she could pet it, barely believing the wolf was allowing this. For the first time, Mr. Goo did not pull away. Letitia stroked its coat and felt something loosen in her chest. She whispered her gratitude, genuinely moved by the wolf's comfort. She pulled out her brush to show her appreciation, offering to groom the wolf properly. As she brushed its fur, she asked herself when she had lost her edge, when she had become so complacent. The answer did not matter anymore. What mattered was what she did next. By the time she finished brushing Mr. Goo, her determination had returned in full force. If no evidence existed to prove her case, she would create it. She would fight back tenfold. She stood up, eyes blazing, and declared she was ready for whatever came next. She looked down at the wolf one more time and told it she loved it. Meanwhile, from within the wolf's perspective, there was a quiet reflection. The wolf had noticed Letitia was feeling down and had decided to let her pet it just this once. But there were more pressing matters. Suspicious movements had been noticed around Natalie, and the wolf intended to investigate those strange activities personally. 5 days passed. The day of King Glenreid's birthday party arrived. Letitia stood in her finest attire, flanked by her companions, ready to face whatever accusations awaited her at the celebration. The grand hall was filled with nobles, their whispers buzzing through the air like static. Letitia felt every gaze on her as she entered. The weight of their stares was uncomfortable, but she kept her composure. The preparations were complete. She had done everything she could. A woman approached and commented on the honor of seeing Letitia dressed appropriately for the occasion. The remark carried a subtle edge, but Letitia let it pass. Congratulations were exchanged for Glenreid's 24th birthday, and the formal atmosphere settled into place. Letitia and Glenreid sat near the thrones, and she noted the strange casualness between them despite being married. An attendant announced the official start of the birthday celebration, and the event moved forward. The food drew immediate attention, an unusual dish was served, and the guests remarked on its unfamiliar appearance. One of them found the flavor refreshing, but the mood shifted when Dears, Natalie's aunt, fixed Letitia with a mocking expression and asked whether she was truly confident in herself. The question dripped with condescension. Then it happened. A man stepped forward to present something to the gathered nobles. It was a cake, the same kind of cake Letitia had invented. Dears declared boldly that while the appearance was the same, their version was superior in quality. The implication was clear. She was claiming Letitia had copied them. The accusation went further. Dears stated openly that Gilbert, who claimed to be the creator, had stolen the recipe from their side. All eyes turned to the throne. Glenreid asked directly whether Gilbert had a counter-argument against the allegation. Voices erupted. Someone insisted that Letitia's version was a lie and questioned the timeline of events. Others pointed out that the rival version had been announced earlier. But Letitia stepped in with a calm, measured observation. She questioned the logic of the accusation. Why would the item have been given to someone else before this birthday party if it had truly originated from the other side? She dismissed the claim as a manipulative attempt to take credit for something they did not create. The hall crackled with tension as she laid out her reasoning. The chef from Natalie's side, Gilan, sneered at the idea that a noblewoman could claim to be the creator of a recipe. He argued that women of Letitia's standing had no business in a kitchen. Letitia responded without raising her voice. She told him plainly that cooking was her hobby and that the chefs at her home could verify her skills if anyone cared to ask. She then challenged Gilan and everyone questioning her to produce evidence that anyone had developed the cake before she did. Gilan and Dears dismissed the testimonies of Letitia's staff, arguing that servants were not credible witnesses. Letitia agreed that evidence needed to come from an unbiased source, and the back and forth intensified. Natalie suggested that a blacksmith could provide evidence. Letitia countered immediately. If the blacksmith was employed by Natalie's ducal family, he was hardly an unbiased source either. The room fell silent for a beat. Then Letitia declared she could provide definitive proof. She turned to King Glenreid and respectfully requested permission to use magic in the hall. Glenreid's response was simple. He told her to go ahead. Letitia took a handful of iron scraps and performed her refinement magic, shaping the raw metal into a perfectly formed cake mold right before everyone's eyes. The audience gasped. The mold was identical to the one used to bake the chiffon cake, and the fact that she could create it from nothing proved she had designed it herself. She declared that this was her proof, that she had not only invented the recipe, but had refined every tool used to make it. Gilan dismissed it as a parlor trick, but Letitia shut him down. She pointed out that the mold's durability, lasting for days rather than the usual hours that magic-created items survived, could not be dismissed as a simple trick. The crowd murmured in agreement. Then Bodley, the head imperial magician, stepped forward and corroborated Letitia's claims. He explained to the audience how difficult such a feat of refinement magic truly was and acknowledged that her abilities were exceptional. Letitia maintained a calm smile, privately crediting her past life knowledge of iron and metallurgy for what she called her cheat skill. The mood shifted in Letitia's favor. She suggested generously that Deers might have simply lacked knowledge about refinement magic, given its obscurity, giving her the benefit of the doubt. The crowd began murmuring that Letitia's ingenuity clearly predated her arrival in Wolfwald. Deers was grasping for anything to hold on to. In a final attempt, Deers tried to use Gilbert against Letitia, bringing up his expulsion from Natalie's kitchen. Letitia turned the accusation back around. She suggested that the real problem was that Deers could not stand seeing Gilbert succeed under someone else's roof. Deers grew visibly frustrated, losing her composure as Letitia signaled that she had even more evidence back at the villa, ready to be presented if needed. Her opponents were stunned into silence. Deers pointed at a document on the floor and shouted that it was a forgery, another fake, her voice rising with desperation. But before she could continue, a sharp voice cut through the hall. It was Natalie. She called out to Deers by name and told her to be quiet. The room went still. The shift was immediate. Natalie, who had been silent and expressionless throughout the entire confrontation, finally spoke for herself. She addressed Deers directly, her tone composed but firm. She told her to stop showing such disgraceful behavior in front of His Majesty. Deers froze, stunned that Natalie had overridden her. The doll princess, the girl who never spoke for herself, had just shut down her own aunt in front of the entire court. Natalie's intervention brought the confrontation to a close. The accusations collapsed. Letitia stood her ground, vindicated, her reputation and Gilbert's honor intact. The tension in the hall slowly dissolved as order was restored, but the political landscape had shifted. Natalie had revealed, even if only briefly, that she was not entirely under Deers's control, and everyone in that room had seen it. With the hall still ringing from Natalie's intervention, she did something no one expected. She stepped forward and took responsibility for her subordinates' actions, stating that she would bear the punishment herself. Deers stared at her in shock, unable to believe what she was hearing. But Glenreid was not finished. He turned his attention to Natalie from the throne and asked directly whether the accusations against Letitia had been true. When she could not answer, he pressed further, questioning her about the chiffon cake and linking the fabricated evidence to a blacksmith in her family's territory. Natalie tried to protest, but the weight of her vassal's sins fell squarely on her shoulders. She was visibly shaken. Glenreid presented documents to Natalie, and as she read them, her composure crumbled. The evidence of fabrication was laid bare. Deers's scheme to forge proof and frame Letitia had been exposed completely. Glenreid stated with cold authority that using power to create false evidence was futile. Letitia watched from her position, noting how effectively the king wielded his authority. She recognized it for what it was, a strategic move against the Western aristocrats, a demonstration that he would not tolerate their schemes, and a warning to keep them in check. Glenreid formally accused Gillan of plagiarizing the recipe and announced that both Deers and Gillan would face punishment. The hall buzzed with the weight of what had just happened. The Western faction had been dismantled in a single evening, but the story behind the leak still needed answers. Outside, Letitia and her staff pieced together how the information had been passed. They identified the location where the handoff had taken place and realized that Krona, the cat-eared maid, had been involved. Her meticulous habits had made her actions predictable once they knew what to look for. Letitia confronted Krona inside the villa. The maid was agitated, surprised that she had been caught. Letitia pointed out that Krona's careful, precise nature had actually been what gave her away. She explained how she had anticipated Krona's movements and motives. Then Letitia shifted to the cake itself, noting that the plagiarized version had failed because the people who stole the recipe did not truly understand the ingredients or the technique. Krona was stunned to hear the technical breakdown. Letitia did not stop there. She addressed the real reason behind Krona's betrayal. It was not ambition or malice. It was debt. Krona's parents had left her with a financial burden that someone had exploited to turn her into a spy. As Letitia laid out the truth, Krona broke down in tears, overwhelmed by guilt and the realization that someone had actually taken the time to understand her situation. The aftermath played out in the shadows before it reached the light. Krona, still shaken, walked through a darkened corridor to meet her contact. She was uncertain and afraid. Letitia and Lucian tracked her movements discreetly. When they found the location, they confirmed that the information chain led back to Natalie's faction. But there was more trouble. Letitia had heard rumors about a creature being kept at Natalie's estate. She crouched behind some bushes and watched as a massive griffin came into view. It was enormous and imposing, and the people nearby reacted with alarm. Someone shouted a warning. In the chaos, a bottle was splashed, and Letitia caught the smell of meat. She realized instantly that the scenario had been orchestrated. Someone had lured the griffin toward her deliberately. This was not an accident. It was an attack. She called out to Krona as a warning, and someone shouted for everyone to run. But Letitia stood firm. She told her companions not to worry. Her voice was steady, and her confidence surprised everyone around her. Krona felt guilty for having dragged Letitia into danger, but Letitia waved it off with a determined smile. She had this under control. Her confidence came from years of training. A brief memory flashed through her mind of the intense regimen her family had put her through. She'd come a long way since the first time she'd used her magic recklessly against Smia back in the ruins. Her skills had grown sharper and more refined. She assessed the griffin in the forest clearing and handled the situation with a composure that left everyone watching in admiration. When the danger passed, one of the attendants approached Letitia and apologized deeply. She confessed her guilt, admitting her involvement in the plagiarism scheme and revealing that her younger sister had been manipulated into it. Letitia listened and then reassured her. She pledged her support and protection, making it clear that she led with empathy, not punishment. The legal consequences came down swiftly. Krona received a lenient sentence, given the circumstances of her debt and cooperation. Diers, Galan, and their associates were not so fortunate. The original charges combined with the additional crimes meant a grim future for them. Letitia took it all in with a composed expression. Justice had been served, but there was no satisfaction in watching people fall. She simply moved forward. In the days that followed, Letitia reflected on the chaos she had caused at Glenreid's birthday party. She sat quietly, petting one of the wolves, and admitted to herself that she felt bad about turning his celebration into a courtroom. She wished she could have heard his honest thoughts about the chiffon cake she had given him as a formal gift, but she knew he was too busy to indulge her. Gilbert had tried to resign again during the ordeal, this time to prove his innocence. It was the second resignation letter in a short period. Letitia found it both frustrating and oddly endearing. The man was surprisingly stubborn about his honor, which only made her respect him more. Then a messenger arrived from Natalie's estate. Letitia was curious. She was led to a cart, and what she saw inside made her gasp. The griffin, the same one that had attacked her. A man explained that the creature had calmed down and could be released. But there was more to it than that. The griffin had shown a clear sign of submission. It had chosen Letitia as its master. Magical beasts, once they bonded with someone, could not be tamed by another. The griffin's allegiance was settled. Letitia was bewildered. She had not asked for this. The man explained that Natalie herself had made the decision. Her words were simple. The griffin deserved to be with a master who loved and respected it. Along with the creature came an offer of 10 years' worth of expenses for its care, presented as gratitude for the trouble Natalie's faction had caused. Letitia considered the enormous value of a magical beast. Then she smiled and accepted without hesitation, promising to treasure it. She turned to the griffin and studied it. Thinking about what to call it, she recalled that she had already named the garden cat Ikan. She brainstormed playfully, tossing out ideas. Eventually, she settled on the name Fawn. The griffin seemed to approve, and the moment was marked by a burst of warmth between them. A quiet memory surfaced. Somewhere, Natalie had tasted something Letitia had made. The flavor had moved her, though she would never say it openly. The exchange of the griffin was not just politics. There was something genuine underneath, a gesture of respect from a girl who had spent her life being spoken for by others. Letitia stood in the garden of her villa, Fawn the griffin at one side, the gardener cat at the other, wolves lounging nearby, and Lucian standing faithfully behind her. She let out a long breath and smiled. She had been cast out by a prince, exiled from her homeland, shipped off to a foreign kingdom as a decorative queen, and dragged into court politics she had never wanted. But here she was, surrounded by fluffy creatures, a kitchen full of recipes to perfect, and a life that was finally, truly her own. She declared with quiet satisfaction that she could finally return to her slow, peaceful life. And this time she intended to enjoy every moment of it.